Randolph Scott really didn't like him more than anyone else. Randolph Scott was born with the name George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia. He grew up in a big, polite Southern family that cared a lot about being disciplined, getting an education, and being honest. These things would later show up in how he acted in movies and how he lived his life. His dad, George Grant Scott, was a well-respected man who worked with fabrics and textiles. His mom, Lucille Crane Scott, was known for being fancy and proper. Randolph was the second kid out of 7 children, and growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina helped him become quietly confident and good, which became a big part of who he was in his movies. He first went to private schools and then to Georgia Institute of Technology and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He planned to follow his dad's path and work in business or engineering. But life in Hollywood had different ideas for him. Scott's journey to becoming a star didn't happen right away. After fighting bravely in World War I as an artillery officer in France, he came back home with a fresh sense of what he wanted to do with his life. In the early 1920s, while he was visiting California, he fell in love with the movie business that was growing there. He was tall, athletic, good-looking, and had Southern charm, so several casting directors noticed him. He started his acting career in a humble way, working as an extra and doing stunts before getting small parts where he could talk. His early work showed how hard he tried and how humble he was, which made him different from many other actors at that time. By the late 1920s, he had steady work in Hollywood and soon started making talking movies, where his deep, strong voice made him really stand out. During the 1930s and 1940s, Randolph Scott's career did really well. He was in all kinds of movies, from funny ones to serious dramas, but it was Western movies that really made him a legend, with films like The Last of the Mohicans in 1936, Western Union in 1941, and The Desperados in 1943. Scott became known as the perfect Western hero, quiet, honorable, and tough when facing danger. His characters showed a way of living based on being decent and brave, just like how he really was in real life. Unlike many other famous actors, Scott stayed away from the bad stuff that came with being a celebrity. He was known for being professional, quiet, and totally dedicated to his work. Working with director Bud Boticher during the 1950s created some of the best Western movies ever made, including 7 Men from Now in 1956, Ride Lonesome in 1959, and Comanche Station in 1960. These films, which people now think are masterpieces, showed Scott as a man of action who felt bad about things in his past, but still followed a strong sense of right and wrong. Scott's impact went way beyond his last movie appearance in Ride the High Country in 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that movie, he played an old lawman trying to stick to his beliefs in a world that was changing. This role was kind of like his own graceful goodbye to Hollywood. When he retired, he did it with dignity, choosing to leave movies on his own terms. He made smart investments in real estate and businesses, and eventually became one of the richest actors of his time. But even though he had a lot of money, he stayed modest, down to earth, and focused on his family and his faith. Randolph Scott got married twice during his life, and both marriages showed different sides of his personality. One connected to high society, and the other to quiet, happy family life. His first marriage happened in 1936 when he married Marion Somerville DuPont, a woman whose family name was super famous in American business and social circles. Marion was the daughter of William DuPont Sr., who was part of the wealthy and powerful DuPont family, and she was the great-granddaughter of Eleuthère Irénée DuPont de Nemours, the French-born chemist and businessman who started E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company, one of the biggest industrial companies in American history. Through this marriage, Scott entered a world of inherited wealth and old money privilege that was very different from his simple upbringing in North Carolina. Marion DuPont herself was an interesting and talented woman, not just a rich heiress but an independent, strong-willed horse rider with a huge passion for breeding and racing horses. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia estate that used to be the home of President James Madison, and she turned it into a world-class horse breeding and training place. Before marrying Scott, Marion had been married to George Somerville, a Virginia sportsman, and interestingly, Randolph Scott had been the best man at their wedding. This weird connection added an unusual twist to their later relationship, suggesting that their bond grew slowly and, maybe surprisingly, from friendship into romance. However, even though their marriage seemed glamorous, the marriage between Scott and Marion DuPont wasn't meant to last. Their worlds, even though both were privileged, were really different. Scott, who was becoming a Hollywood star at that time, was focused on building his acting career in California, while Marion was deeply involved in her horse activities and the social traditions of the East Coast. The couple often lived apart, separated by both distance and lifestyle. In 1939, just 3 years after their wedding, their marriage ended in divorce. Although they didn't have any children together, the split was reportedly friendly. Interestingly, Marion continued to use the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, keeping his last name for nearly 50 years until she died in 1983. This lasting choice might have shown that she still liked or respected him, or maybe she just wanted to keep a name that had become part of her public identity in the world of horse racing and charity work. After being single for several years, Randolph Scott found real happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he married Patricia Stillman, a beautiful actress who was 21 years younger than him. Patricia had appeared in a few films during the early 1940s, but after marrying Scott, she mostly focused on family life. Their relationship was totally different from Scott's earlier, more socially strategic marriage to Marion DuPont. This time, the marriage seemed based on real love and shared values. The couple settled into a comfortable and lasting home life, avoiding much of the Hollywood spotlight that so often ruined celebrity marriages of that time. In 1950, Randolph and Patricia grew their family by adopting 2 children, a daughter named Sandra and a son named Christopher. Scott, who had built his movie image as a tough and serious Western hero, was actually a loving and gentle father. Friends and co-workers often talked about how warm his home life was and the strong bond he had with his wife and children. Unlike many other actors of his time, Scott managed to keep a stable marriage without scandal or public drama, and his family life became one of the most important parts of his later happiness. Randolph and Patricia's marriage lasted for 4 decades until he died in 1987, and it stayed one of Hollywood's quieter success stories. Away from the bright lights of the movie business, the Scotts lived a peaceful life, spending time between their home in Beverly Hills and their ranch near Santa Barbara, where Randolph could enjoy his lifelong love of horses and the open countryside. Through this lasting partnership, Scott found the kind of stability and peace that he didn't have in his first marriage, a calm, home life that matched the strong, dependable characters he so often played in movies. In the world of Hollywood Western movies, few people were as big as Randolph Scott and John Wayne. Both were huge icons of tough masculinity, each showing a different kind of hero on screen. But behind the scenes, their relationship was far from friendly. While fans usually thought that 2 such similar stars would respect each other, the truth was way more complicated. Randolph Scott, the refined Southern gentleman with perfect manners and a quiet sense of dignity, really disliked John Wayne. Their differences went beyond just competing for roles. They were based on personality, values, and the way each man saw acting and the code of being a cowboy. "I never liked the man," Scott once said directly. "He was everything in Hollywood I didn't admire." Scott had always been proud of showing restraint, both in movies and in real life. His performances were careful, thoughtful, and quietly powerful. He didn't need to yell or show off to show strength. John Wayne, on the other hand, was all about showing off, loud, noisy, and grabbing attention wherever he went. "Wayne was a showman," Scott said, "and I was a craftsman. There's a difference." To Scott, Wayne's kind of heroism felt theatrical, almost fake. He saw Wayne as a product of Hollywood myth-making rather than the careful storytelling that Scott valued. Behind the polished image of the Duke, Scott saw what he called a salesman's version of the West, more focused on image than doing what's right. Their careers crossed paths sometimes, though they never directly competed in the same film. However, the sense of competition was definitely there. Both were leading men in westerns throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and movie producers often compared how much money their movies made. The studios tried to put us against each other, Scott remembered. But the truth is, we never needed to be compared. We were playing two different games. Scott's films often had moral subtlety, a sense of internal struggle and thinking deeply, while Wayne's movies thrived on big action and patriotic feelings. Scott found that approach shallow. I played men who questioned their choices, he said. Wayne played men who never questioned anything. Beyond disagreeing about art, their personalities clashed. Scott was known for his calm, gentlemanly behavior, rarely raising his voice or bragging about his success. Wayne, on the other hand, was loud and spoke his political opinions a lot, often taking over conversations with his conservative views and big confidence. He liked to talk about politics and war, Scott once said. Two things I never believed should be glorified in a saloon or on a soundstage. Wayne's confident patriotism, so often shown in black and white moral terms, really annoyed Scott, who believed life, like the frontier, was full of gray areas. Their opposite personalities meant that any meeting between them often ended in tense silence or sharp remarks. There were also personal insults that made the gap between them bigger. On several occasions, Scott reportedly felt disrespected by Wayne's casual comments about his acting style. Wayne, known for being blunt, once called Scott too pretty to play a real cowboy. Scott never forgot that insult. He thought being loud made him authentic, Scott later said. I thought being real meant being quiet. Even in Hollywood circles, people knew that Scott would politely leave a party if Wayne showed up. Their mutual friends, actors like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea, were often caught in the middle, being careful not to praise one man in front of the other. But perhaps the deepest reason for Scott's dislike came from what he saw as Wayne being a hypocrite. Wayne, despite his on-screen image as a fearless hero, had avoided joining the military during World War II, a decision that many people in Hollywood quietly resented. Scott, who supported the war effort in other ways and had a lifelong respect for soldiers, saw this as a moral failure. I didn't judge men who stayed home, Scott said, but I couldn't stand those who pretended to fight wars on screen after refusing to serve in one. To Scott, that contradiction defined Wayne's character, a man more worried about appearances than principles. Despite his dislike, Scott never publicly attacked Wayne or tried to ruin his legacy. His dislike was private, only revealed in honest interviews late in his life. I respected his success, Scott admitted, but I never respected the man. The two Western legends stayed professional, their paths rarely crossing after the 1950s. But their silent feud became part of Hollywood folklore. For all their differences, both men shaped the Western movie genre in big ways. Scott through quiet dignity and moral complexity, Wayne through larger-than-life heroism. Ironically, their contrast may have been what kept the genre balanced. Still, in Randolph Scott's heart, there was no affection, no friendship, only a deep and lasting dislike. John Wayne, he once said with cold finality, was the last man I'd ride the range with. Randolph Scott died of heart and lung problems in 1987 at the age of 89 in Beverly Hills, California. He was buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. He and his wife, Patricia, had been married for 43 years. She died in 2004 and is buried next to her husband. Their mid-century modern home was torn down in 2008. The Randolph Scott papers, which included photos, scrapbooks, notes, letters, articles, and house plans, were given to the UCLA Library Special Collections.